Okay, awesome. So we're recording now, and my name is Olivia Tarpley, and I'm the Graduate Leadership Council President. And I'm joined this evening by Dr. Fanta Ah, who is the Vice President for Campus Life and Inclusive Excellence. So thank you for spending your evening with me, Dr. Ah. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, Olivia. Thank you for your leadership of the Graduate Leadership Council and the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So to get us started, would you be willing just to talk some about your background a little bit and your AU story? I think that our graduate students would love to hear some more about you if they haven't already had a chance to at some point.
Okay, great. Well, I often say that my AU story is one, and it's not an unusual story, I think, but it's one where AU has been my academic home for a long time. I did all three of my degrees at American. My undergraduate was in COGAD in accounting. My master's degree was in the School of Public Affairs with a focus in organizational development. And my doctorate from the College of Arts and Sciences in sociology. And so clearly, I think it goes without saying that it's a very special place for me because it's the place that I really found my passion and my voice. But it also has been my professional home for the last 30 years. Started in international education with the Office of International Student and Scholar Services, and then moved from there to do more the portfolio of student engagement and diversity and equity work. And then it was from that position that I moved on to the vice president role, where I oversee several portfolios areas that include our housing, our residence life counseling, etc. And in addition, help to coordinate our diversity, equity, and inclusion work institutionally. And just recently took on also the portfolio for undergraduate enrollment so that we can make sure that we really have a more seamless process for the undergraduate student experience at American University. So it's been my professional home as well. And I've taught also in the School of International Service at the graduate level. So I've had an opportunity to really be in the classroom with graduate students, something that I love and that I really miss. But the nature of the work is such right now that the last time that I was in the classroom was in 2018. And so I am eager at some point to go back to doing that. But so AU has been a place for me on a lot of level, and I've seen the university change and evolve over, as you can imagine, over those 30 years. But the key thing that have kept me at AU has been really our students, the undergraduate and graduate students, and the students who are attracted to a place like Washington, D.C., that becomes a gateway to the world, to an institution like ours that is small, not too large, that actually has a campus feel and such a diversity of programs. So the students really is what that's an anchor, and my colleagues across campus.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I feel some of those themes ringing true for me too, especially about why I chose AU and my graduate program. The community was definitely a big draw for me, along with the academic program. So thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned some of your work now with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you talk some about the ways that the Office of Campus Life, like the relationship between OCL and graduate students and what that commitment looks like?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So within the Office of Campus Life, certainly one direct nexus with the graduate students is through our Center for Student Involvement, where the Graduate Leadership Council and its leadership works in partnership with advisors within our Center for Student Involvement so that we can look at what are the ways that we can support graduate students in their leadership, and the Graduate Leadership Council working across the schools. So that's one avenue of connection for us within campus life. But the other areas include our core services, whether it's our counseling services, whether it's our students' health center. Those are some of the core services as well that graduate students tend to use. And then for our students who are perhaps veterans and they're connected, and military connected, through working with the Veterans Lounge, that may be another way that our graduate students get connected to the Office of Campus Life as well. And of course, within Campus Life, we hire quite a few graduate assistants as well. We really benefit from the expertise and the experience that graduate students coming in are able to offer our various offices, whether it's the Center for Community Engagement and Service, the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and a myriad of other places where we do have graduate students who are there. And that is, a way for them to put into practice the skills that they have and also get an opportunity to get to know the university more. And then we coordinate our efforts with the graduate units through our Dean of Students office, the Dean of Students office supporting students who may need assistance on a range of things and being able to access those services, and that support becomes important. And through, of course, the International Student Scholar Services for our graduate international students. So those are the touch points that graduate students have in connection to the Office of Campus Life.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I know for some graduate students, we may not all be familiar with what the Office of Campus Life includes and what falls under that umbrella. So that's very helpful. Could you talk some about the efforts to make our campus inclusive and to recognize diversity? I know we have the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Can you talk more about some of their those projects and initiatives?
Sure. So I would say for the area that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion, my role is the inclusive excellence work is actually separate from campus life. So I have an assistant vice president, Amanda Taylor, Dr. Amanda Taylor, who works directly with me. Our role in this area of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, Olivia, is how we, in many ways, can help coordinate with across the institution. We often say that the work of diversity and equity and inclusion is everyone's work and it's everyone's responsibility. It doesn't fall on one or two people to make that happen. It takes the entire campus, everything from looking at the campus culture and climate and how communities are built, to looking at policies, procedures, and practices, and how they either hinder or facilitate, access and equity, to looking at our curriculum, the educational mission of the institution. And then, so those are some of the key things that we work on. And so there's the President's Council for Diversity and Inclusion that has representation from faculty, staff, students, as well as alumni. And that group really becomes a sounding board for us. And we have a strategic plan on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it outlines what the priorities are for those different areas of inclusive excellence. And so part of my role is ensuring that institutionally we're making progress against those goals while working with my colleagues, and my colleagues meaning the entire cabinet, whether it's the provost area and the question about faculty development. How do we continue to support faculty in their development? And so the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning becomes an important stakeholder in that. And then how do we look at some of the curriculum and the ways the curriculum gets deployed to make sure that we're really preparing the next generations of leaders who understand the role and impact of inclusion, as an example, to looking at our policies and practices, name and gender identity. That's an example of one of those projects where we had to work with the Office of Information Technology to make sure that the technology was appropriately in place, that students who wanted to have a chosen name could be able to do so, and that it not only was on all parts of the system, including the roster, but different places where they would go to access services, as an example. So the role is one of coordination with campus partners. The role is making sure that our strategic plan, that we are making progress against the strategic plan, and assessing, looking at, where are we with issues of access, and how are we facilitating that? How's the curriculum, going, and what's the students' experience around those pieces? So it's all of those different parts, but it's not done by myself and Amanda. It is really a team effort, and it has to involve the entire campus community. Every part of the campus has to have a role and a stake in this process, all the way from enrollment at the graduate and undergraduate level to alumni relations.
Awesome, thank you. I know that we have graduate students really from all over and from all over the world. So I know that folks are always interested to hear about the ways that we are doing equity work. So thank you. In terms of, so we mentioned a couple of the different units that fall within campus life, and I know that the counseling center and mental health resources are available to students,
Mhm.
whether specifically about mental health or just generally. Could you talk some about the ways that graduate students are supported at AU outside of the classroom?
Mhm. No, it's a great question, and the mental health is a big one, right? I mean, and COVID has definitely, I would say, certainly has played a critical piece in this, and we've seen an increase in the need for mental health support, and just an increase in the need for wellness in general. And so I think that's a big piece of it. So to answer some of your question around specifically, mental health and the counseling center, um, there are two places where this support comes from. One, I'm going to give the quickest one, which is through our student health center. We actually have a full-time psychiatrist and a nurse and a nurse psychiatrist, and that's particularly important for students who may be coming to us, and in coming to us, in addition to needing counseling, may also need medication and support with medication, and making sure that the medication is continuing to be assessed and balanced. And so we added that position of a full-time psychiatrist and nurse psychiatrist about 5 or 6 years ago, 6 years ago,
Mhm.
and that was important for us to have that in place. Then we have our counseling center, and within our counseling center, really it's been the team of psychologists and
Mhm.
making sure that we have a diverse set of psychologists. And by diverse is everything from what's their specialty area, whether it's eating disorder, whether it's looking at suicidal ideations, and the range of areas of expertise are there. But it's also making sure that they're diverse in terms of representing the clients who would be coming in. So that's been an important part of it as well, and being able to provide mental health support that way through counseling.
Mhm.
We noticed that we needed to really continue to augment, given the demand for counseling. And so we did add, particularly during the pandemic, we added additional tools. One is a 24/7 sort of what I call a sort of crisis hotline,
Mhm.
where any student, graduate students, also members of the community and others may call if there's a student perhaps who is in need of support, and it's 24/7, and they can access someone who will be able to guide them through that process. Because as you and I very well know, sometimes that need may come up at midnight, right? It's not going to come up between 9 and 5. And so having that was another piece that we felt was important. And then adding to that is we signed an agreement with a platform that has a really rich, robust set of counselors who could
Mhm.
provide counseling and support through sort of tele mental health. And that could be also accessible at all different times as well. That's been an additional part, and all of those are available to graduate students. So that's one of the ways that we're really looking at how we support graduate students, and the ways that we can do that. We also have the Health Promotion and Advocacy Center, and part of that has been to look at how do we message to students about stress management,
Mhm.
wellness in general, and so forth. What are the tools that may be available that we can, make sure that we're providing those resources to students? When it comes to long-term therapy, what we do is referrals. We
Mhm.
have folks who are there and will refer students to the resources that are within the DMV area that students can access, and then trying to make sure that those connections happen. The biggest challenge, Olivia, is being in a city like Washington, D.C., the demand outstrips supply exponentially.
Right.
We have seen really that, the number of counselors who have their own practice and who are just overwhelmed by the demand, for counseling. And so we have been in conversations writ large institutionally about how do we think about wellness in a holistic way? What is the relationship of nutrition, to wellness? What's the relationship of, other forms of whether it's mindfulness and other things that can help with
Mhm.
some of the stressors that we know and around wellness as well. So we're really doing more work in that space and to try to look at the holistic part of that. So more to be done, but we have augmented our services in terms of, and also for some of our graduate students are online, right? So they're
Mhm.
not here, and the mental health, provisions are so restrictive when it comes to, where you can dispense mental health and the jurisdictional issues there. There's not a federal thing that covers, if you're a psychologist and here, you're licensed in DC, it does not allow you to necessarily be able to provide counseling in New Jersey or New York and so forth. And so having this additional telemental help allows us to be able to, for students who are online students or students who decide to go abroad, to access those services and be able to have some of the support that is needed.
Right.
So more to be done, but the mental health is we've seen with COVID, it has really, really had a tremendous impact. And our counselors all have really, are steeped in multicultural counseling. They all have also really very robust background in racial trauma, and other forms of trauma as well, in being able to provide support to students.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember one of the first things that I started to hear about during my term were concerns from students about mental health. And even before becoming a graduate student, I think those conversations had started to happen more so culturally, which I think is great. And so knowing that AU is responding and being conscientious of those concerns is really great to hear.
Yeah, no, it is. And we have to continue to evaluate and assess, right, and see where we can continue to make progress because we know how much that impacts the student experience, how much that impacts the academic and students' overall life, as well. Those are things that becomes important. And I think our ability to think about the holistic nature of it, I think, is key as well.
Definitely, yes. So you mentioned the pandemic in your answer,
Yes.
and I know that this is, I'm sure, something that you and your team are working on every day is response to COVID and student concerns related to COVID. A question that I have for you was submitted by one of our graduate students is that there are some concerns regarding the newly updated changes for the mask policy. And we're wondering if you can talk some about the factors that went into the decision, and especially considering folks that might be immunocompromised, what the factors that went into the decision.
Great. No, it's a great question. Yeah, no, I think it's safe to say, for us at American University, COVID response actually started for some of us in January of 2020 when we had to make the decision of bringing back our students from China. And so just, for context, it's been that journey since then, and we're way past 2 years into it. So it was then, with that, and then, making the decision in March of that year that, given what was happening, that the university needed to go, online, and the list goes on. And so those decisions are made at the cabinet level, which are the president, the vice presidents, and provost and stakeholders. All of our work around COVID response has been a combination of working with the consortium of universities that are in this area, but also really looking at the guidance that's coming out from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, as well as the DC Department of Health, and working with our colleagues across. And also really in many ways taking stock of what is happening within the range of experts within the field of COVID and COVID response. So that's been the case from the beginning. And we said from the beginning that it would be important that we take into account the needs of our community, that we take into account the health and safety, and that we take into account their mission of teaching, learning, and research. And so that's been the case. So we're among the first who, implemented the vaccine mandate. And then again, when the boosters came, mandated the boosters. We, made decisions, the cabinet in concert with many others about, with COVID and the surge and all of that, when would be online and so forth. So what came into this decision from the cabinet level was a combination and a confluence of things that have been going on for a while. One was, where's the trajectory of where we are 2 years into this? But more importantly, where is both the science and where is the community part of this? You have said before, Olivia, this has taken an incredible toll on the mental health. even just the everyday basis of the layers of things that people have to think about.
Mhm.
And then you add to that the fatigue that has happened, but also more importantly, over this period of time, more and more continues to be learned, right? When we
Mhm.
first started, it was, you have to look at surfaces because that's where you may catch. And then it had evolved. And then it was with the vaccine. Well, the vaccine from the beginning was never meant to necessarily be 100%, proof of not getting COVID, but it was really focused on hospitalization, um, severe illness and death, and so forth, and the importance of the vaccine in those areas.
Right.
In addition, the CDC came with guidance
Mhm.
about where communities are with its levels of low, medium, and high, and mapped every single sort of jurisdiction
Mhm.
and where they were in that. And then, as a result, came back with its recommendation for mask
Mhm.
and the mask sort of removal of mask.
Mhm.
So we looked at that, and that was there, and institutions had already started to follow suit. Several institutions, not in the DC area necessarily, but around the country, had started to follow suits. Some before that. Then the DC Department of Health came back with this guidance, and it's not only its general guidance, but specific guidance for K through 12 and universities.
Mhm.
And the guidance for K through 12 and universities was mask and sort of, being able to relax on mask, and particularly through the K through 12 and universities. We said, for communities, it's incredibly important that we get the vaccine rate at a high level and that
Mhm.
we get the booster rate at a high level. And I don't have to tell you, Olivia, what it takes to implement these measures on a
Right.
daily basis. And when it came to fully vaccinated, we were close to 99%. When
Mhm.
it comes to boosted, we are basically now over 90%.
Wow.
And when you look at the country and you look at the rate overall, we are above what
Mhm.
is considered sort of that level of the community, and the community had complied with those. And so, given those measures and everything else, and the fact that COVID is here for quite a while, and the measures, we had to really follow where the science part was going. And this was one of the determinants, along with the fact that 2.5 years into COVID, and now that we had reached that level with the guidance that has come from CDC, from DC Department of Health, the federal government, the White House, and the list goes on. And now there's even discussions, as you are very well aware of potentially the lifting of masks in, with airlines
Mhm.
as a
Right.
next sort of step that's coming in. We felt that for the community, that we needed to get to that place, given where we're with vaccine and everything else, and where the CDC had determined, and with DC guidance that had been provided, that this was the time to begin to think about the layered approach. And in this
Mhm.
case, to think about the masking. And in our case, we said mask is optional, but
Mhm.
also in having mask optional indicated that it's incredibly important, because one of the things we've also learned is in masking, depending on the quality of mask that you take, you're protecting yourself. And that we needed to make sure that people who are, if you're immunocompromised, if you're a person who really feels like your comfort level is still to be masked for all the reasons, and that should be respected, and that wearing the mask is protecting yourself, and
Mhm.
that is the agency that we now needed to come to in terms of the masking policy, knowing that vaccines will continue to be a mandate, knowing that also we continue to have the testing available for our community, and K through 12,
Mhm.
where there's not that level of vaccine yet, because even the young ones don't have access to vaccine, had already removed the mask, have the option to remove the mask. So that's where we are, is moving from what was mandates after mandates to saying we need to have now our community to take, for all of us to take some agency individually and collectively for our individual health and our collective health as well.
Right. Thank you for
And
sharing.
it is very understandable that folks are anxious. It has been over
Mhm.
2 years. two
Right.
years of really having to be conditioned to think about this, and so it is real, and it's gonna be an evolution. And again, as the guidance clearly stated with CDC and with DC Department of Health, if conditions change on the ground and they readjust, we all would have to readjust. But I think that's one of the things that you're seeing, in not just in the US, but also in different parts of the world, including in Europe and other places. And all 50 states now have, have come to that. And many, many universities have moved in that direction.
Mhm. Right. Thank
So
you.
it's a transition, and
Right.
transitions is hard, and transitions are difficult. They're difficult steps, but this is really about how do we get folks and really trusting that our community knows how to make really the important and community decisions as well.
Mhm. Right. I think that thinking about, the transitions and the way that things evolve, change can be hard and really a lot of growing pains sometimes. So I appreciate the just hearing about from start to, not necessarily finish, but from start and then through the different phases.
And this
So,
is what we're going to continue to have distribution points for masks, right?
right.
Because it's important for members of our community who, and as President Burwell memo indicated, it's important for us to respect that. For those who want to continue to wear the mask, it's critically important for us to respect that. It's important.
Mhm. So in my last question, thinking about transitions and change and evolution, I know that this year was particularly interesting. Something that the previous GLC president told me as I was beginning the term was that it would be an interesting year with coming back in person, and just that it would be an interesting year. And he wasn't wrong. It definitely has been interesting, and we've had, successes and challenges throughout. Can you talk some about some of the opportunities that you see as we finish the semester and then even go into the next academic year? Opportunities for graduate students, especially graduate students that will be going into their second year or even starting their program here at AU.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. I think it's been a challenging year. It's been a challenging 2 years on a lot of level. And we're not fully out of it yet, right? So the opportunities that I see is, um, it will take a while, I think, Olivia, for us to fully understand and appreciate the impact that COVID has had on our lives. I
Right.
think we've seen some of it for sure, but I think there's so much more, and it'll take a while. Everything from what it has done to community and to our everyday interaction, and trust relationships that we build or not, um, to what it means to be in a university setting during really a unique time, right? I think so. From that perspective, it is my hope and aspiration that as we move into the next year, that some of those community things will come back.
Mhm.
It may come back in different forms, and that's fine. Because one of the things also that I think we've learned from the painful parts of the pandemic are also the parts where there's been some new opportunities and doors that have opened, right?
Mhm.
For if you're that graduate student who is working, full time, but you want to engage and get to know the pulse and life of the campus, and you're interested particularly in some of the key topics of discussions because that's what drew you to Washington and all of that. The fact that you can do that with Zoom,
Mhm.
and you don't have to commute to campus for just that, and it's not on one of the days when you have to be on campus. That's an opportunity that affords and open the door to a graduate student who before then was not participating in any way,
Right.
because the lives of our graduate students are very, very diverse, right? Um, and so that's an example of one of the ways that as we move forward to build community, I do think we will be able to build more robust communities. There's
Mhm.
something to be said about being in the same room and what that's like, as you all have seen how that is like in the classroom, to what it means, for GLC and the kind of programming that it does and how it looks at the needs of its constituents in different ways. So that's an example of one of those things that I really see the opportunity coming up for those who are in their second year. The
Mhm.
other opportunity that I see is the opportunity for greater collaboration across.
Mhm.
And that is collaboration across our graduate students in all walks of life, and even maybe our graduate students in the law school. I
Mhm.
think there's opportunity for graduate students to continue to coordinate and to collaborate and to see where the synergies are. That's another opportunity that I think is there. And I think particularly with you in your leadership role, you've really tried to bring a sense of community, and a sense of what I would call rhythm to the
Mhm.
graduate student experience that is not easy, given that you have all the schools and within the schools, the different programs, etc. So the ability to wrap our arms around graduate students as a whole, I think that that's an important part of it. And then when they're on campus, continuing to find places and spaces where graduate students can be. Because we hear sometimes graduate students will say to us, when I'm here, I want to be in my school, and that's what I want, that's where I hang out. And then you have others who say, well, yeah, that's good for me. But I also like to be across, meeting with people across schools because there are other areas of interest that are beyond just my school. So the
Mhm.
question is, what are the places and spaces that could provide more of that? I think that's another important way that graduate students can benefit from as we move out of from the pandemic to more of an endemic. I think place with COVID, those things I think will go a long way. And then lastly, how to best leverage Washington D.C. you know I mean, this is an incredible city. It's a city that is just um, rich, and so in terms of just the resources that are here and the learning opportunities that are here are immense, and the opportunity for networking is tremendous. So that's the other piece that I think that we'll see more of. And then alumni engagement. How can graduate students engage with alumni for career opportunities, for other ways of connection? And again, some of that could be very much yes, in person, but also some of our students, not everybody wants to remain in Washington.
Right.
People want to be in other places in the country or even around the world. So the
Mhm.
ability to connect with alumni and having this platform of Zoom, I think will be another way for graduate students in both their networking, mentorship, and engagement. But it takes leadership, Olivia. And again, that's the other place where I think you've done a tremendous work during this period of time. And I think for whoever comes into the GLC, the ability to identify what are the 2 or 3 priorities and work in partnership with us, the administrators, I think that would be important. But I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about the future.
I am too. Thank you very much for spending your evening with us. That brings me to the end of my questions and topics and things that I've been hearing from students. If there's anything you'd like to add or anything that I might have missed, I'm happy to do that now. But I also know that we are approaching dinner time and don't want to keep you too long this evening.
Well, I mean, I think only two quick things. One is I want to say thank you. Thank you to the Graduate Leadership Council, because you're an incredibly important body for graduate students, because you, in many ways, identify what the areas of needs are, and then you bring graduate students together as a community. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that, because it's incredibly important. Graduate students are here for a very short period of time, but that's an important time that when they're here. And so our ability to do more programming and to engage becomes important, and the GLC is really at the center of that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that with COVID, we have been through a lot of change, and change is hard. And so I do recognize that as we go through what I call the next transition point, that it will come with some great anxiety, and some apprehension and so forth. But I have tremendous faith in our community and have tremendous faith in our resilience as a community. And so that's the second thing that I just wanted to kind of leave with as we leave for today.
Thank you. That is a wonderful way to wrap things up. And we appreciate you very much for taking the time this evening. And I know that we'll be sharing the recording via our contact list and then also working in conjunction with the Office of Graduate Studies to make sure that students can see it. And so thank you again, Dr. Ah. I really appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you, Olivia, and really best of luck as you continue down this semester. And thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you. All right. Bye for now. Thanks, Dr. Ah.
You take care. Bye bye.